Imagine standing at the very peak of your country's power, surrounded by the Republican Guard, protected by national constitutions and United Nations treaties. Then, in a single heartbeat, you find yourself bound in shackles, shoved into the corner of an unmarked military cargo plane, only to wake up in a cold cell within a country you have only ever visited as an adversary. Is presidential immunity a reality, or is it merely an illusion that evaporates before the barked orders emanating from the White House? From Panama to Baghdad, from the palaces of Haiti to the Venezuelan presidential aircraft seized from its runway just days ago, the United States has established an unwritten law. The entire world is an American courtroom, and every leader is a potential defendant awaiting hour zero. We are not talking about traditional military coups here. We are talking about operations of sovereign piracy and legalized abduction, through which Washington has transformed its intelligence agencies into international bounty hunters. In this documentary investigation, we open the black box of the most dangerous kidnappings of world leaders in history, revealing how the Ker-Frisbie Doctrine evolved from a line in an old law book into a sword hanging over the necks of the world's kings and presidents, and how national sovereignty became a mere procedural obstacle in the path of American shackles.
The roots of this story begin in the darkened offices of Washington, D.C., where the first cornerstone was laid to legitimize bounty hunting under the guise of transnational jurisdiction. The secret that few know is that American courts relied on a landmark ruling dating back to 1886 known as the Ker-Frisbie Doctrine. This is the legal principle that effectively greenlights international abductions. It states with legal audacity that the manner in which a defendant is brought to court, whether via a formal extradition treaty or by being forcibly snatched from their bed in another country, does not invalidate the American judiciary's authority to try and convict them. Over decades, this doctrine transformed into an open license for the CIA and the DEA to carry out what is termed extraordinary rendition. In this section, we reveal the backstage details of the secret Britain memo issued during the Reagan era, which granted U.S. forces the right to act as a global police force within the territories of sovereign nations without the permission of their governments. It is a philosophy that turned the world into a legal jungle where a president who opposes Washington's interests is considered a mere fugitive from justice with millions of dollars placed on his head, and commando units are sent to kidnap him in cold blood. We are facing an intelligence apparatus that recognizes no geographic borders. Instead, it views the world map as a mere stage for forced detention operations, where international law is bypassed through legal loopholes that allow leaders to be brought in shackled under the cover of night. It is a systematic destruction of the concept of diplomatic immunity, where the only question in the halls of the Pentagon is not, "Is this legal?" but "How do we get him without anyone noticing?"
On the night of December 20, 1989, the United States launched Operation Just Cause to invade Panama. However, the true objective was not to occupy the land, but to kidnap the head. Manuel Noriega, who for 3 decades had been the CIA's golden agent in Latin America, suddenly found himself facing 27,000 U.S. soldiers who came to abduct him on charges of drug trafficking. The secret details of this operation reveal an unprecedented level of psychological brutality. When Noriega sought refuge in the Vatican embassy, U.S. forces did not storm the building to avoid an international crisis. Instead, they executed Operation Nifty Package. Here, we uncover how the embassy was surrounded by massive speakers that began blasting loud, hard rock music and white noise at frequencies designed to cause hallucinations and nervous breakdowns 24 hours a day, preventing Noriega from sleeping and shattering his will. Leaked secrets indicate that American commanders were betting that the general would collapse psychologically before he collapsed militarily. When Noriega finally surrendered, he was not treated as a military leader. He was photographed in a humiliating prison jumpsuit with an identification number, prisoner 41586, in a visual message meticulously designed by Washington to break his prestige before his people and the world. In this section, we dive into the details of his secret flight to Miami, where he was placed in a military cargo plane under heavy guard and forbidden from speaking to anyone, transforming from a head of state and commander-in-chief into a mere defendant in a criminal case before a local court in Florida. Noriega's story is the clearest embodiment of the treachery of American politics. A leader is used as a tool, and when his expiration date arrives, or he decides to rebel, he is kidnapped and cast into the depths of federal prisons to spend the rest of his life behind bars, carrying secrets that, if revealed, would demolish the reputations of former U.S. presidents. Noriega was but the first drop in a series of presidential abductions that has not stopped since.
On the night of February 29, 2004, Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, was drowning in chaos. But behind the walls of the presidential palace, a strange and suspicious chapter of diplomatic kidnapping was unfolding. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the priest who rose to power as the first democratically elected president and a champion of the poor, found himself facing an offer he couldn't refuse, presented by U.S. Ambassador James Foley. The astounding secret in this operation is the total information blackout. While Washington claimed it was conducting a voluntary evacuation to protect the president from rebels, Aristide was whispering to his aides that he had fallen into a trap of disguised detention. We reveal here the details of the final hours, how a force of U.S. Marines entered his private quarters, separated him from his personal guard, and forced him onto a white military cargo plane with no windows or identification markings, a scene reminiscent of gang tactics rather than regular armies. What happened inside that plane for 20 hours is the height of mystery. Aristide flew over the Atlantic Ocean without knowing his destination and was prevented from making any contact with the outside world, only to find himself suddenly unloaded like cargo at Bangui Airport in the Central African Republic, a country thousands of miles away with no diplomatic or political ties to Haiti. Secrets leaked from the Élysée Palace and the White House confirm a secret Franco-American coordination to get rid of Aristide, as the great powers viewed his demand for billions of dollars in colonial-era reparations as a red line that necessitated his forced exile. The kidnapping of Aristide was an embodiment of the policy of enforced disappearance of symbols. His people woke up to find the palace empty and the president evaporated, while Washington coolly stated he left of his own volition. But the truth told by Aristide from his African exile remains like a dagger in the side of international legitimacy, asserting that democracy in Haiti was kidnapped in a U.S. military uniform. This incident became a model for how to isolate leaders through security deception and expel them from history in a single night under the guise of humanitarian protection.
On December 13, 2003, the American bounty hunting strategy reached its zenith in the town of Ad-Dor near Tikrit. We're not talking about a traditional military arrest here, but about a complex chemical and psychological operation designed to extract Saddam Hussein from the depths of the earth and present him to the world as a living corpse. Operation Red Dawn was not merely an intelligence coincidence, it was the result of massive pressure in which U.S. Special Forces used numbing gases that paralyzed the guards and Saddam himself inside the famous spider hole, preventing him from using the personal pistol he had in his possession. The true secret we uncover here is the visual execution practiced by Washington before the actual execution. The broadcast of the video showing Saddam Hussein's teeth being examined and his disheveled hair was not an innocent medical procedure.
It was a carefully studied dehumanization process intended to shatter the legendary image of the great leader in the hearts of millions. In this section, we delve into the details of the secret locations to which Saddam was moved from Baghdad airport to black sites under CIA control, where he underwent intensive psychological interrogations led by Agent John Nixon. These interrogations revealed that Saddam was in a state of detachment from reality, writing novels while his army collapsed. The kidnapping of Saddam Hussein from his hideout, turning him into a prisoner of war at the mercy of American guards, and then handing him over in a legal play that ended with a noose, represents the bloodiest American message. There is no trench deep enough to hide from satellites and American shackles. This kidnapping aimed to break the spirit of resistance by showing the leader in his weakest physical state, a policy Washington later applied to other leaders. The president is transformed from a symbol of sovereignty into an object of spectacle and mockery, confirming that the goal of American abduction is not merely trial, but symbolic assassination that precedes the gallows by far. Saddam Hussein became the harsh lesson for anyone who thinks that palace walls or trenches in the earth can protect them from Washington's inevitable fate. At dawn on June 28, 2009, Honduras woke up to a surreal scene the Latin continent had not witnessed in decades. The presidential palace had turned into a stage for a brutal raid targeting President Manuel Zelaya. The true secret in this operation, known as the pajama coup, lies in the hidden logistical role played by the Soto Cano Air Base, a military facility managed by the United States on Honduran soil. We reveal here the details of those terrifying moments, how masked soldiers trained by U.S. Special Forces stormed the president's bedroom and forced him at gunpoint to leave in his pajamas, a deliberate attempt to show him in a state of weakness and humiliation. Leaked details from radar records confirmed that the plane that kidnapped Zelaya stopped at the American base to refuel and receive the final green light before taking off to his forced exile in Costa Rica. Despite the soft diplomatic rhetoric of the Obama administration at the time, documents later revealed by WikiLeaks showed that Washington was aware of the plan hours before its execution and viewed the kidnapping of Zelaya as the fastest solution to stop the spread of leftist influence in America's backyard. The kidnapping of Zelaya represents a model of kidnapping by proxy, where Washington settles for providing coordinates, fuel, and political cover, while the kidnappers wear local uniforms. This proves that sovereignty in Central America ended at the borders of American military bases, and the pajamas Zelaya wore on the exile plane became a symbol of how leaders are stripped of their prestige and authority in a single night by a decision issued from across the seas. As we enter the year 2026, the American kidnapping strategy has moved into a more sophisticated and dangerous phase. Washington is no longer just chasing bodies. It has begun kidnapping sovereign symbols in an unprecedented operation of aerial piracy. The event that shook international circles just a few days ago was the seizure by U.S. authorities of the Venezuelan presidential aircraft, the Dassault Falcon 900EX, belonging to Nicolas Maduro. After being surrounded in the Dominican Republic, it was forcibly moved to the state of Florida. This operation is not merely a seizure of property, it is a symbolic kidnapping of the president by paralyzing his international movement and turning his aircraft, which bears the state emblem, into a spoil of war within American territory. We uncover here the secret details of this operation, how the U.S. Department of Justice used narco-terrorism laws to impose an aerial blockade that made Maduro a prisoner within his own borders, with a $15 million bounty offered for his head as if he were a gang leader in the Wild West.
This path actually began with the kidnapping of Alex Saab, Maduro's diplomatic envoy, who was snatched from his plane in Cape Verde in 2020 and moved shackled to the United States in an Operation Caracas described as criminal abduction. Leaked intelligence documents indicate that the goal of kidnapping the aircraft in 2026 is the final psychological pressure to force Maduro's inner circle to hand him over or to lure him into a similar aerial trap. We are now living in the era of digital and legal kidnapping, where America uses financial contracts and shell companies as tools to abduct heads of state, turning international airspace into an open hunting ground. It confirms to Nicolas Maduro and every opposing leader that Washington is capable of pulling their flying throne from the sky, awaiting the moment it places the real shackles around their wrists, closing the file on the last of the rebels in the Latin continent with a style that blends 21st century techniques with the ancient laws of the jungle.
In concluding this secret file, whose pages are heavy with the scent of gunpowder and the silence of cells, we find ourselves before a harsh geopolitical truth. History has not always been written by the pens of diplomats. It has sometimes been written with the shackles designed in Washington to fit the wrists of presidents who once thought they were above accountability. This series of presidential kidnappings we have reviewed, from the generals of Panama to the kings of Iraq, down to the seized Venezuelan aircraft in 2026, are not merely fleeting incidents in the history of crime and politics. They are a blunt American manifesto that redefines the concept of national sovereignty in the 21st century. Over decades of bounty hunting, the United States has proven that the immunity of presidential palaces is merely a temporary illusion that evaporates the moment an arrest warrant is issued by a judge in a local court. It has transformed the world map into an open arena for the application of its own laws, where the difference between an allied leader and a wanted criminal is but a thin thread controlled by the interests of the White House and the fluctuations of the CIA. The greatest lesson these investigations leave us with is that the method of kidnapping has evolved and its masks have changed, but its essence remains constant. If Manuel Noriega was snatched with rock music and cannons, today's leaders are kidnapped through legal piracy, the disruption of airspace, and the seizure of sovereign symbols in broad daylight, just as happened with Maduro's aircraft, which now sits in Florida as a silent witness to the breaking of state prestige. We live in a world where the Ker-Frisbie Doctrine is no longer just an old legal opinion. It has become the supreme law governing international relations, where power grants legitimacy and shackles end diplomatic debate. As the world watches these consecutive images of leaders being led away in humiliating prison garb, the question remains hanging in the halls of palaces. Who will be the next president for whom a white American cargo plane waits at a deserted airport? And who is the leader who will wake up to find his kingdom has been pulled from beneath his feet by a transnational judicial decision? Ultimately, this investigation remains a cry against global moral contradiction. While Washington claims to pursue tyrants in the name of justice, others see it pursuing rebellion in the name of empire. But the constant truth amidst this conflict is that the big game recognizes no immunity and respects no borders. The leaders who disregarded the rights of their people found themselves, in the end, mere numbers in American prisoner ledgers. We close the file on kidnapping presidents today, but the operations continue. The satellites are still watching, and the bounty hunters are still waiting for the signal to begin. Remember always, in the game of power and sovereignty, truth is the first victim to be kidnapped before the presidents, and history has no mercy for the weak who believed that high walls would protect them from Washington's inevitable fate. Thank you for following this deep investigation. We meet again in a new file, where the truth remains always the ultimate target pursued in the shadows.